Today could go down in history as the day that changed everything in a war that's already killed over 100,000 people. In Syria, hundreds more are dead, many of them children. But this time it appears deadly chemical weapons were used.
A report from UN inspectors confirmed that on August 21, 2013, rockets containing the nerve agent sarin were used in Syria. More than 1,400 people, including 400 children, died in this attack. This use of chemical weapons in the Syrian civil war sent shockwaves throughout the international community. It reminded all of us that the use of WMD remains a major global threat. The existence of international norms and laws forbidding the use of these types of weapons did not prevent this atrocious act against civilians. So how are these weapons developed, despite being outlawed by a number of universally recognized treaties and agreements? As we will see, the answer to that question illustrates past weaknesses in the world's ability and its resolve to control commodities required to build these systems. Nuclear weapons have only been used twice as an instrument of war. In comparison, chemical weapons have been employed numerous times in the last century. They were used by both sides during World War I, by Mussolini's army countering guerrilla forces in Ethiopia, by Japan during World War II, by Egyptian forces during the Yemen Civil War. One of the most notorious uses of CW since the First World War was during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. During that conflict, Saddam Hussein used CW against Iranian fighters, as well as Iranian and Iraqi civilians. We will come back to that case in a few minutes. First, let's talk about how the control of chemical weapons by the international community evolved over the last 100 years. After World War I, when both chemical and biological weapons, or CBW, were employed, some steps were taken to ban the use of these types of weapons. In 1925, the Geneva Protocol went into force, outlawing the use of CBW. Despite this agreement, numerous countries still developed CBW programs and used these weapons in conflicts. Let's go back to the Iran-Iraq War. Saddam Hussein authorized the development of chemical weapons for use against the enemy. After suffering a number of military setbacks, in 1983, Iraqi forces began employing chemical weapons, particularly mustard gas, against Iranian troops. They later also used these weapons against civilian populations, such as the notorious attack on the village of Halabja. Ultimately, Iraqi forces were thought to have employed blister agents, such as mustard, as well as nerve agents, like sarin and tabun. Iran brought the issue of Iraq's use of CW to the United Nations. Initial reaction to the claims were minimal, despite Iraq being party to the Geneva Protocol. The issue of CW use by Iraq finally garnered attention after UN inspectors visited Iran in the mid-1980s. Baghdad's flouting of the Geneva Protocol showed the extent to which the agreement was insufficient to really stop the spread of these weapons. So how did Iraq obtain the materials to develop its chemical weapons program? UN investigations revealed that much of Iraq's capabilities were developed through the import of foreign equipment and materials. How could Iraq get so much access to foreign equipment for a military program that was technically illegal under international law? Well, politics definitely played a role. Much of the Western world took Iraq's side on this conflict. As such, it was often not difficult for the Iraqi government to gain access to sensitive materials. When export controls did get in the way, Iraq's procurement network set up front companies or lied about the ultimate end use of the materials. In reaction to Iraq's CW program, in 1985, the Australian government proposed to harmonize the export controls of CW-related materials. The Australia Group was formed. It created guidelines and control lists to help suppliers stem the flow of sensitive CW-related materials. In 1993, the Chemical Weapons Convention was open for signature. Coming into force in 1997, the CWC completely bans the development, stockpiling, and use of CW. Countries who join the CWC pledge not to develop or help others develop chemical weapons.
In fact, this organization has been quite successful in the implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, and we were able to achieve a universal norm without being discriminatory.
But what about countries who weren't members of the CWC? Syria, for example. One of the best routes to prevent countries outside of the CWC from developing chemical weapons is to stop their ability to import sensitive materials from abroad. However, in the case of today's Syria and 1980s Iraq, attention to controlling foreign assistance was a case of too little, too late. Going back to our earlier question, how did Syria obtain the materials and technologies to start their CW program? Information on that is somewhat murky. There are indications that in the 1980s, they gained access to materials from the Soviet Union, and then possibly some assistance from Egypt, which had its own CW program at the time. Similar to the earlier Iraqi program, Syria obtained materials for CW development from Western European companies as well. Since the 1980s and 1990s, we have seen an increased focus on controlling the most sensitive materials related to CW production. With today's controls, it would be more difficult, although not impossible, for a state to develop a CW program. The restrictions in today's system makes the most sensitive items much more difficult to obtain, although traffickers may still be able to get around those controls. It's critical to continue to deter and prevent the development of CW programs by states. But it is also essential to think about how we can deny non-state actors like terrorist organizations access to these deadly arsenals. We all realize that preventing the spread of chemical weapons can have an effect on global trade. Even more than in the nuclear area, the controls on CW-related materials will impact the flow of commodities used for industrial purposes. Triethanolamine, for example, the same chemical that is used in the production of cement, is also essential in the production of mustard gas. In order to comply with international and domestic laws, a significant number of companies around the world must be aware of and able to implement controls of their products. So what's the future of CW-related export controls and international security? How are we going to deal with the limitations posed to international trade by the need to protect civilians from ever being attacked by CW again? We will attempt to answer these questions in the following weeks of this course.